to pull the major party that is closest to the way you're thinking, to what you're thinking. You must show them that you're capable of not voting for them. I worked within the Democratic Party. I didn't listen or have to listen to anything on the left while I was working in the Democratic Party, because the left had nowhere to go.
Right there. The left had nowhere
if you want
to go. That's the motto. That's the understanding of it. That has been the way the Democratic Party has operated, and that has been the way that lefties has basically accepted it. You have nowhere to go. And if you're terrified of that monster, I know these are not the policies and everything else that you want. We're not going to be for those policies that you want. And you're going to vote for us still, because you're going to say that we are better than that monster in the other party. Meaning the fact that you're terrified, the cowardice, is basically the thing that cows and keeps you within the confines of that party, incapable of getting any real political change that you want. What Lawrence O'Donnell was saying here is real. If a politician wants to get elected, that politician wants to get elected more than pretty much anything else. In regards to that politician wanting to get elected, there is class elements that go into this, but let's start there first. That politician can't do anything for anybody unless that person gets in office. 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash, so cash becomes the thing, the lifeblood of the political system, and it also, because of such, has politicians leaning in a direction to get that cash. And not just get the cash, also incentives for later on. Maybe their kid needs a job later on. Maybe their kid needs to get into school later on. These kind of influence favors or influence peddling. All of these things fall in line in our political system. First and foremost, however, is getting in office. And if indeed the person requires a certain political group to get in office, well, they got to get that group, right? Well, what if that group stops being obedient? What happens when that group stops it just accepting and starts making demands in regards to what they need and what they want? Well, you have African Americans, let's say 30 million of them, saying, we demand Medicare for all, with a bunch of other lefties who are not African Americans, who are black, gay, straight, etc., white, whatever, jumps in and also agrees, says, you know what? We also want Medicare for all. We're not Democrats. We're not, we don't consider ourselves political, but we do believe that the policy is right. Meaning you get your public to make a demand, and the Democratic Party has to either accept and acquiesce to that demand and try to implement the Medicare for all in the midst of a pandemic, or they say, we don't accept this demand that the majority of the public wants. We prefer to tank it to Trump, which could be a choice that they could choose. And again, that has questions in and of itself. But first and foremost, the politician's job is to get elected. And in our country, we've inverted that process, where lefties, because they're so terrified of the Republican Party, will vote for pretty much any random Democrat in a majority. Lawrence O'Donnell is right. Apply that to 2020. You have a situation where lefties get into the political space with Sanders. That's their horse. And that horse flames out. And lefties, almost immediately, turn tail, spread cheeks. Why do I say that? Why do I say that? Why do I say such horrible things about lefties? When I say that Joe Biden goes to the glory hole barn that they've never cleaned, and it's been that way for the last 40 years, and he goes there believing that he's going to have a line of lefties coming to service him back to back to back, and he's going to be absolutely and entirely right. Because what Lawrence O'Donnell said still applies in the mindset of lefties. As opposed to looking at your candidate and say, we demand Medicare for all, and you won't get our support if you don't back that policy. Lefties don't do that. And because lefties don't do that, lefties are irrelevant in the political space. You have zero power in the Democratic Party, zero power in regards to relevance. All because at the end of the day, the belief is that you are in a negotiation where you refuse to walk out the door. whatever happens in this room, we're going to make a deal. Well, they don't deal with you under those circumstances, because the deal at that point becomes you are just complicit. You look at the homelessness. You look at the fact that all of this poverty still is around. All of these people who are being evicted. And you wonder, why is a lot of Democrats so horrible? Why, after having the House of Representatives for like 50 years, did they lose it? And it really does boil down to this notion of no accountability. The left, the division of the country that cares about those things, basically abdicated any level of responsibility for those things and lumped in with Democrats, blue no matter who, etc. And any notion of accountability went out the window. My argument is not to vote for Donald Trump. My argument is not even to push for a vote for Donald Trump. My argument is that regardless of who is on the other side, it is the responsibility of us to hold that person accountable. And there are times where that person and that party needs to lose to get across standards of conduct and behavior and things that you are willing and not willing to accept. That's politics. What happens with Sanders and AOC and TYT and all of these progressive groups, cedars of the world, is not politics. That's something else. That's trying to get people to be complicit. That's creating a bunch of sheepdogs and sheep herders to get those people into the party. They basically are making the point that the goal is not for the politician to represent your interests, but for you instead to just throw your body at the politician. Understand, this incentivizes. It makes it rational to take advantage of either blacks or groups of Hispanics that vote Democrat, or for that matter, lefties. Supposedly the base of the party. It's the reason why Joe Biden can so wildly hit the base. I'm not for the Green New Deal. No, I'm not for Medicare for all. I'm not for this. I'm not for that. I'm not for defunding the cops. No, one issue after the next, he hits the base because in his head, they have nowhere else to go. And at no point is the base ever going to assert a demand and say, this is what we demand, this is what we want. And I know that because Medicare for All had 88% approval within Democratic Party, and you still couldn't get over the finish line. I mean, for fuck's sake, Sanders flames out, but understand your influence, your power in regards to a population and the public goes beyond just what you do in regards to voting, and it goes beyond what you do in regards to having a candidate to represent your interests specifically politically. Leverage, your ability to influence politics goes beyond just your voting for Bernie Sanders or having AOC do X or do Y. It also goes to what you're willing and not willing to accept. And in this case, it needs to be clear, understood, vocal and loud, that a group, millions, that back specific policies that the American public believe in and agree with. And that we know this to be true because month after month after month, they thought Sanders was going to take it and run away with it. And policy and the polling showed that those policies that he wanted were popular to the point where he won the policy arguments across the board. To get a candidate that doesn't care about that, what does that mean? How is it a representative government if indeed the candidate who is supposed to be representative of the party and to a larger degree the country doesn't seem to care about the policy interests of the party? Is that indeed a representative government at that point? And I understand people walking around saying, well, you just got to vote Biden. And I ask why. And they say Trump is a maniac. I say, yeah, but how is that any kind of way of holding a candidate accountable when you just are so terrified of the other guy that you give up all leverage and all power in the political space? Even when you win the argument, you give up the power. AOC and Sanders turn tail. Progressive groups turn tail. People who even were considered radicals turn tail. As opposed to having a movement of 30, 40 million people in unison say, we demand Medicare for all. We demand an elimination of student debt. And we demand these things. Not just because these are factors of the left, but because this is what the American public itself warrants. This is what it needs. And ethically, morally, this is what's right, especially given the context of the time that we're living in. AOC and Sanders, with zero power at this point. And I say zero power because at the end of the day, if you are saying, I'm going to vote for you regardless of what you do, then that person doesn't have to do shit for you. And when you have African Americans voting to the tune of like 90% black, then again, you vote in such numbers that they don't have to do anything. And by the way, rational for them to take advantage of you. Incentivizes them to take advantage of you, voting in numbers to such a degree without any demands associated with the vote tally. I'm making the point purely to lefties on this. AOC and Sanders, while they have been dramatically great at getting policy ideas out into the populace, where you can see that those ideas are popular and you can see that those ideas are directly attributable to the environment to which we're in, meaning those policies are trying to fix societal issues, not politics as usual. They've done a massively great job at that. But from the standpoint of the politics of getting those policies over the finish line, they are not the people to model. Right now, zero power, leverage is what she's looking for. And leverage is not the thing that she has. And so it's like you send a letter saying, we demand this. And they tell you, go kick rocks. And what are you going to do? Nothing. You have no leverage in this process, no leverage in this situation. And trying to tell Biden, we demand that you not put these corporate people in. That letter is going into the toilet, not even to the trash, into the toilet. And yes, Joe Biden will use it and flush it. And he may not even wash his hands afterwards. I'm making the point and trying to get across how minimal, how little and tiny your levers of influence are in regards to pushing Joe Biden. Because the moment that he's in that office, what do you have at your disposal? No, the stick that you had at your disposal was threatening him with loss. Now, if you want to make the argument that the Democratic Party would not appropriate a policy that the majority of the public needed, and that the majority of the public agreed with to deal with a pandemic, and instead they would rather tank it to a man they're calling the apocalypse, then the argument you should be making is that I cannot believe that you are going to tank this election to a man that is considered the apocalypse, as opposed to appropriate policy to benefit the American public and to deal with the fact that we are dealing with a pandemic. This is a letter that these guys sent, apparently. The left-wing members, including Representative AOC, Katie Porter, Ayanna Pressley, Raul Grijalva, and candidate Jamarl Bowman, along with 39 progressive groups, signed a letter obtained by Politico arguing that no C-suite level corporate executive or corporate lobbyist ought to have Senate-confirmed positions in the Biden administration. One of the most important lessons of the Trump administration is the need to stop putting corporate officers and lobbyists in charge of our government, they wrote. As elected leaders, we should stop trying to make unsupportable distinctions between which corporate affiliations are acceptable for government service and which are not. Now, this is aimed at Joe Biden. But tell me, why should he care? You have nothing at your disposal. Either you have leverage or you don't. Either you have power or you don't. And the catch becomes the leverage that you had, the monstrous leverage that you had, is tens of millions of people that agreed with you. And tens of millions of people that wanted something different, wanted a change. And in this very specific moment, despite you not winning specifically within the context of the party, because the party was never going to agree with you, you had numbers, you galvanized numbers. You had mail lists of all of these people that you could have communicated with to give them a heads up of saying, this is what we're doing, we're going into a negotiation, just like as if we were in a strike of sorts. Those are things that you had the power to do, but instead, capitulation. I'm telling you, this finger trap that you're in is only going to get tighter and worse. Who do you think is coming behind Trump? What, a Tom Cotton a Ted Cruz. You're going to always, forever be in this situation of a least worse hostage situation where the Democratic Party is basically using a Trump gun to your head to compel your vote. I'm making the point that if they want to win, then you have numbers. And in using those numbers, you have the ability to influence the political space without using those numbers in a way to complicate their plans, to make their lives miserable, to make it where they will lose without backing a particular policy. Without doing that, you will continuously fail. And you will continuously be stuck in this battered wife relationship, or the political equivalent of a battered wife relationship, where all of these things, homelessness, poverty, kids going hungry and whatnot, all of these things, you would get incrementalism, tiny, tiny bits of change that they will scream that this is the greatest thing ever because Republicans don't want to do any of it. You would continuously get those problems, the ills of our society, persisting. I understand you think you're making it better by lumping yourselves in with Democrats continuously. But I am making the point that the ills of your society, that you recognize as ills of your society, that lefties always bitch and whine and moan about. Oh, we need to stop kids in debt from being on kids' back. Oh, we need to make sure there's no one in poverty in this country. We need to make sure that kids can go to school without, having all of this debt on their backs. We need to make sure that every kid has a decent meal, has lights on in their house, that every person has a house, that nobody is home. You have all of these things that lefties want to accomplish, the Medicare for all stuff, all of these things, many of which are popular, and all of which you continuously, year after year after year, give up. I'm saying that it's because you're willing to give up. It's because you're not willing to deal with the abyss. You got the abyss anyway. You got it anyway. And you laid down in 2016 and still got the abyss. I'm making the point to you that at some point you must break the cycle. And in breaking the cycle, the fight is on whether or not you are willing to let them fail. They may test you. They may say, we don't want to capitulate. We don't want to set the precedent of us catering to the demands of the public in that way. They may say that. But again, that is on them at that point, even though there are consequences for them saying that. But your fight and your argument really does need to be around, if Donald Trump is indeed apocalypse, then why aren't you willing to appropriate a policy that the majority of the public supports? And who are you representing after all, if indeed you're not willing to do that? This letter is nothing. And this letter is nothing because they're not willing to use the powers at their disposal to make it hurt and to make it something. And waiting after election, after he wins, at that point, he has all the marbles. And you're still in your box, powerless, irrelevant. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.